Започваме последната заключителна сесия. В нея започваме с госпожа Емилия Кралева, заместник-министър на външните работи. Темата с външно министерство, външна политика, дипломация и енергийна сигурност ми е много при сърце. Още на времето, когато бях посланик в Русия, тя става все по-голяма част от работата на нашата дипломация и понеже виждам, че във външно министерство се работи системно по тази тема, а на всичкото отгоре и голяма част от въпросите, те са част от управлението на, това говорим за политически риск, т.е. институционалните реакции, капацитети, те са същности при разбирането на смесницата между възможност и риск в тази среда. Затова, както се казва, подът е... Не, floor is yours. Това е най-лошият превод, който човек може да направи.
Благодаря много. Благодаря за възможността, която ми се предоставя да кажа няколко думи на тази изключително важна среща, която провеждате от вчера. Малко ще ми бъде трудно, тъй като се налага да говоря след министър-председателя, който вчера взе участие в вечерята, а също така и след министъра на енергетиката, госпожа Петкова. Тоест, те до голяма степен изчерпват темата като цяло за развитие на енергийната свързаност. Но същевременно ще се опитам да кажа гледната точка от страна на Министерството на външните работи, която по-скоро е свързана с сигурността на страната или с енергийната сигурност. Тази гледна точка е за нас водещата, изключително важната. Знам, че много трудно се прави разлика между това какво попада в чисто икономическата сфера на живота и какво попада в политическата. Но те, разбира се, са взаимно свързани, но това изобщо не означава, че може да има специфични гледни точки в това отношение. Затова мога само да потвърдя значението наистина на енергийната независимост на страната и по този начин да потвърдя също така стремежа, който има цялото правителство, разбира се, особено тези министри и министерства, които пряко ги касае, да работят абсолютно с пълна отдаденост на темата за енергийната диверсификация. Министерството на външните работи наистина в това отношение има пълно разбиране по въпроса и не само разбиране, по-скоро се работи наистина стратегически по тези теми и се мисли винаги много сериозно. Мога да кажа, че това е тема, която влиза в всички аспекти на многостранната дипломация, на двустранните отношения с много от страните, с които имаме контакти. Дори и на последни срещи, които имаше отново, това беше една от темите, които сме имали при всяка една среща. Бих казал, че това е тема и на наши председателства, водени от Министерството на външните работи, последното от които и в момента се случва, председателството на Черноморското икономическо сътрудничество. Имаме такава тема. Но отделно, България, знаете, че миналата година беше и председател на Съвета на Европейския съюз и не на последно място, това бе също така една от темите. Ако се върна на вчерашния ден, на който присъствах вчера след обяд при откриването на конференцията, имах възможността да чуя. За мен беше изключително важно и много полезно, например, да чуя изказванията на някои от колегите от България специално, защото виждам, че има много сериозен напредък. Напредък в пълното разбиране по темата, както за диверсификация, така и за необходимостта от промени, които да подпомогнат законодателната база в страната. И за мен особено ценно беше да чуя това, което господин Иван Иванов обясни и което се прави от ДКЕВР тъй като така създаде оптимизъм и перспективи за наистина за напредък в това отношение, който да позволи една наистина реална диверсификация в България. Всички искаме това нещо. От години знаем, че имаме проблем с една сериозна зависимост в тази сфера, специално в областта на, като цяло в енергетиката, но в областта на природния газ. И по този начин това, което чухме, включително и от министър Теменужка Петкова, беше много съществено. Сега, по отношение на газовия интерконектор, който развиваме и ще се случи съвсем скоро, началото на неговото изграждане, това е интерконектора между България и Гърция, така наречената връзка на английски IGB. Мисля, че това е един абсолютно ключов приоритет, приоритет номер 1 на държавата в тази област, който има абсолютното също така и разбиране и пълна подкрепа от страна на Външно министерство. И госпожа Георгиева е тук и тя знае, че винаги може да разчита на нас като дипломатическа служба във всеки един момент, когато е необходимо да се обърне за подкрепа. Никога няма да бъде отказана. Напротив, много усилия са полагани в това отношение също така, за да се придвижат проектите, да се улесни по-точно тяхното придвижване, до толкова доколкото зависи от дипломатическата служба един такъв въпрос. Не е необходимо да ви убеждавам, всички сте наясно, но диверсификацията наистина е свързана с този проект и той е свързан не само с доставките, но също така и възможността за търговия. И от друга страна е свързан с доставки, които предварително са договорени от Азербайджан и които за първи път ще привнесат един нов източник на газ в България. От друга страна, той е свързан и с проекта за плаващия терминал край Александруполис, развиван от Газтрейд, за който също така смятаме, че е важно и стратегически ценно едно участие на България, съобразно с това, което е предвидено и в енергийната стратегия на България. Знаете, че имаше напоследък и една добавка в тази стратегия от декември месец, в която всички участваме като правителство и подкрепихме с цел именно за да се улесни възможността за диверсификация, за маршрути и за източници и възможности за захранване на проектите, които правителството предвижда. Знаете, че има и такъв проект, който всъщност проектира така наречения газов хъб, който проектира възможността да се събират от различни източници газ. Така че това също стои на дневен ред и българската дипломация ще продължи да работи в подкрепа на този проект. Мисля, че това като свързано с съседните страни, също така изцяло се вписва и в нашето разбиране за района на Югоизточна Европа, който е част от цялостния европейски и източно-средиземноморски регион и който има нужда, има много сериозна нужда, не само България, но и другите съседни страни от една нова свързаност. Затова и за нас това винаги е един от стратегическите приоритети, когато обсъждаме темата за Югоизточна Европа и изобщо за отношенията най-вече и с страните от Западните Балкани. И това беше една от основните лайт мотив на българското председателство на Съвета на Европейския съюз миналата година и то не беше произволно избрано. Отношенията с този регион, те винаги са били приоритет на нашата страна, но сега придобиват още по-съществено значение, като знаем, че имаме перспектива за членство на част от тези страни. България като член на Европейския съюз се опитва по всякакъв начин да подпомогне тяхното включване и тяхната европейска перспектива. При това не е просто така от алтруизъм, а именно с цел региона да бъде един стабилен и сигурна част от цяла Европа, който винаги ще си остане там, където е, но и ще бъде част от европейската система от принципи и от, бих казала, ценности в Европа, за които трябва да се работи много съществено. Това са нашите, така да се каже, напоследък действия, по които сме работили от Министерство на външните работи. Бих допълнила също така, че с интерес наблюдаваме и случващото се в източното Средиземноморие, т.е. откритията, които се правят там на газ, ако се върна на газта отново. Има един нов проект, който всички много добре познават вече, който се нарича ИЗТМЕД и който включва наши много близки държави, като Гърция, Израел и Кипър. От политическа гледна точка, от стратегическа гледна точка, смятаме също така, че е важно България да участва под една или друга форма. Разбира се, това е малко по-в перспектива и не бих казала, че има конкретни действия по него, за разлика от изключителния напредък, който виждаме вече по отношение на интерконектора с Гърция. Но наблюдаваме и този така развиваща се възможност, развиващ се източник на газ за региона. И бих казала, че е много важно наистина там да бъдем участници, а не просто наблюдатели. Ние ще мислим по този въпрос. Има едно много сериозно разбиране. Ако се върна само още веднъж към нашият югоизточноевропейски регион, да подчертая също така връзката с останалите страни, с изключение на Гърция, много важни са и другите интерконектори, които са част от тази стратегия за свързаност. И както и министър Петкова обясни, тази връзка, например, с Сърбия, също така остава и тя е част от възможностите за диверсификация, но и за запазване ролята на България като стратегически транзитьор, бих могла да кажа в случая, на природна газ, така че да може да минава по всички възможни канали, с които България разполага. Цялата газопреносна мрежа на България е наистина, дори да не е толкова вече съвременна, тя е доста широко развита и предоставя възможности на страна, която се намира в центъра на един регион, да бъде наистина разпределителен хъб към различни посоки. В случая да не пропусна също така да отбележа и нашата наистина много добра връзка като цяло с Румъния, добри отношения, но и това, което се развива с Румъния по отношение на газта. Знаете, че и там се изгради такава възможност, която предстои да бъде довършена при Подишор. Така че имаме още една друга възможност за свързване и с другите коридори, като Бруа, като цяло Южния газов коридор, по който се работи, знаете, още от 15-та година, от декември месец, когато бяха договорени съответните споразумения. Мисля, че като цяло имаме много възможности, перспективи от нас зависят и само това ще кажа, че наистина в Министерство на външните работи има пълно разбиране по тази тема. Бъдете уверени, че ще направим всичко необходимо, всичко възможно, за да подобрим наистина българската национална сигурност чрез участието ни във всички тези проекти. За нас това е водещ принцип и не бих казала, че така смятаме, че по-скоро това трябва да води нещата, отколкото чистото смятане на цифри и икономическите показатели, които са безспорно изключително важни, но преди всичко ние трябва да знаем, че за да има диверсификация и да реагираме на опити за политическо влияние през газови коридори, трябва да може да бъдем в състояние да отговорим с съответните средства сходни. Благодаря много.
Благодаря. Майк? Ready? Steady? Merci. Well, he's taken his coat off.
You're going to keep the temperature at 100 degrees. I'm going to take the coat off.
No, you.
Does this work? Okay. I do not have a PowerPoint presentation. I have no slides. But I'm going to talk very slowly because I've been listening to the translators for a day and a half, and everyone talks really quickly here. Pay attention. Get off the phone. I'll be very quick. Alex doesn't like me, so he's asked me to explain the difference between legitimate lobbying and corruption. And I have been thinking, is that wrong, Alex? Yeah. So I have been thinking about that while we've been listening. And the answer is, I'll get to it in a second. I want to say one thing real quick. Actually, I'll say a couple of things real quick. If you imagine that any government is going to control 40% of the GDP of a country and that people are not going to want to involve themselves in the decisions of those governments, you are living in a world that never has been and never will be. Right? Does anyone disagree with that? No, of course not, because we're all grown people. And that means that you have two choices, and only two choices. You can formalize, institutionalize, normalize those interactions. Or you can allow them to be dominated by people who don't want to institutionalize, formalize, and normalize those interactions. Right? Lobbying and corruption are two sides are the only two choices you have available to you. In places where there's corruption, and I'm talking about all kinds of corruption, personal corruption, corporate corruption, government corruption, because let's not kid ourselves, governments have interests, bureaucracies have interests sometimes in who wins competitions, how regulations get written to advantage their friends and not other people, and governments have interests in making sure that lobbyists are constrained, because lobbyists, unlike people who purchase their access into governments, lobbyists like to educate people. They like to provide alternative versions of the truth from governments, from corrupt actors, from companies even. Right? Vasco, you said it. Americans are no smarter than anybody else. In fact, we're probably dumber than everybody else. But, and the energy minister said it when Lou, when you asked her yesterday, said, what's the problem here in Bulgaria? What'd she say? She said infrastructure is what she said. Thanks. Glad you paid attention to answer your own question. Right? And what'd you say today? That what's the key? What's the key? Not infrastructure. Huh? Too much state. Sure. But the real key is that consumers don't have any power, right? That's right. That's because they don't get organized, they don't have lobbying groups, and they can't buy off government officials. They can't buy off other company officials. They can't buy off people. So, what does lobbying and corruption have to do with one another? That's easy. Lobbying is an antidote for corruption. I haven't done this study, but I guarantee you someone has, and if I had another day, I could find it, that the more lobbyists you have, the less corruption you have in the system. United States, we have about 40,000 registered lobbyists in DC, probably another 40,000 unregistered lobbyists, dark guys. America's got a lot of problems, but generally speaking, the system is not corrupt. It's not corrupt, right? We make our decisions above board. So that's your choice as a country, as a region, as a EU, whatever you want to call it. You can have a thriving, transparent marketplace with lots of people providing ideas that people can purchase or ignore, whatever they feel like doing. Or you can have a dark market where 3 or 4 people decide who's going to get what. Now, am I talking about lobbying here, or am I talking about gas markets? That's a trick question. I'm talking about both. And that's what they have in common. And it took me a while to figure out where Alex was going, but that's where he was going. You either have transparent, open markets, and you either have transparent and open thinking, or you don't. One comes before the other. Vasco has inexplicably stumbled into the truth. One last thought before I go. The reason why I was late, and I'm sorry, I thought it was 2:15. Honest to God, didn't we say 2:15? We didn't say 2:15?
No, I said at least an hour.
Who heard 2:15 come back from lunch? Was I it? Okay, well, the hell with you. The reason why I was late is because we went down to St. George's, right? The one thought I want to leave you with is this natural gas revolution, it's going to keep going. It's going to keep going. We're in the first couple of years of it. I know it seems like we've been here 1,000 years. Why aren't we getting free gas? And the answer is, sit still. You will eventually, right? We talked about this last night. From the invention of computers at the University of Pennsylvania in 1946 to having this thing on your person at all times, what's it been, 70 years? Might take a second or two. St. George was executed by the Emperor Diocletian in 285. But his church is still there. This hotel sits on what road? You look down on your thing, it says it right there. That's right, Gorko. Who was General Gorko? Anybody? Who? Who said that? Who got the right answer? Nobody? Really? No Bulgarians? This is terrible. Really? Really? Is that where we're going? Okay. I'm not saying he's a hero. I'm not saying he's a fraud. What I'm saying is that the Bulgarians waited 400 years to be loose to the Turks. 400 years. What I'm saying is, yeah, that's true. What I'm saying is, be optimistic and be patient, but don't stop pushing. And understand these things are all together. Transparent and open markets in thoughts, transparent and open markets in products. Same.
Mike, are you facing a few questions? Because we're starting to grill you with
questions.
But Tom?
What?
No. Just very quickly.
Keeping in mind Tom pays me. So.
After we get through the questions, if you could reserve a little time and chat briefly about what you think the 2020 U.S. election might look like. Because you do that for a living. He does polling and focus groups for a living, so I thought you'd all benefit just for a couple of minutes on that.
Yet. Other questions? Yeah. Does the translator say no when I say yet?
So I have a question. You know, if you go to some parts of the world, you don't see, one of the things we have in Washington is this huge proliferation of think tanks. And I'm curious if you have any views on, I suspect there's some, you know, if you go to Moscow, you might find 2 or 3 sort of highly controlled ones. You go different, even in Europe, you know, it depends, different countries don't, it's really not a tradition we see in lots of the world like we see in the U.S. And I'm sort of curious if you have a perspective on that at all.
Yeah, I do. In the United States, we spend $5 billion, $6 billion a year on political stuff. And everybody on the left side, I'm going to say this, everybody on the left side tuts that. They're like, oh, that's terrible. We spend too much money, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, we spend a lot of money, about as much as we spend advertising toothpaste. And the difference is that this stuff is all really important. And the first thing anybody does when they make real money in the United States is they either buy a newspaper, Jeff Bezos, right, a couple other guys, or they buy themselves a think tank, or they invest in a think tank because they have something to say. They have something to say, and they want to educate people. And, you know, there's no substitution for sort of having people who think about things for a living. And as universities become less and less about people just thinking and more about publishing and other marginally useful things like that, you're going to have that kind of thing. And you should have that kind of thing. And they're from all sides of the spectrum. From, you know, in America, we have the communists, and we have people who are just right of center, like American Energy Alliance, right? Just right of center? Just barely. Other questions? Nobody wants to ask me any questions. Oh.
At the back. Chrissy of Donut.
Physicist in the back. He's an American, guys. It's a trick. He lives here.
Hi. My name is Max. I just have a simple question sort of about like the title of your talk. You said it's lobbying versus corruption. And then in the talk you said that lobbying is an antidote to corruption, and like the more lobbying there is, the less corruption there is. But to me that seems more just like a matter of definition. Like, can you point out like some like non-arbitrary difference between lobbying and corruption that has more to do with the structure of the activities rather than just how you define it?
No. No. It's a little bit like pornography. I know it when I see it, right? If you want a hard definition, you give a bag of cash to somebody to do a specific thing. That's against the law. It should be against the law. But let's be honest. We all know the difference between things that are rigged and things that are legitimately competitive. At least I think we do. So is there a hard and fast rule? Yeah. You can't give people cash directly for doing some specific thing. Should you be able to give them cash for doing something indirectly? No. Should cash ever be tied to an action? You know, all that stuff's against the law right now. And why the presence of lobbyists are important is because the more you have, the more likely you are to have watch guards, people on the other side who have vested interest in arguing their point of view. And you have open forums. All that stuff is a lot more important than thinking about a bright line, because at the end of the day, the people who make these decisions, whether something's corrupt or legitimate, are not me and you, right? It's the voters. You know, you think about the American campaign finance reform, people want to constrain like how much you can give members of Congress and all this other stuff. A much better approach would just be you have to report everything you take and then let people make up their own minds, right? Because that's at the end of the day, quis custodis custodiat, right? Who watches the watchmen? Voters watch the watchmen. That's it. Nobody else does it. That's a half answer to your question, but it's the best I got.
Can I just ask a short follow-up? So doesn't that just have the same effect, though, that the people with the most resources and financial capabilities will have the most effect on policy? I mean, like,
yeah, no, let me finish it for you. You would think that would be a natural outcome in a lot of cases, but it's not. It's not. I mean, you know, and I could go through at any given moment, I could go through 50 things that are going on that the people with the most resources would not like and do not like and are trying to figure out a way to squirm out of. So it's partially that, but it's also partially how good are your advocates and how transparent your system. Who knows what everybody advocates is really important. You know, that goes to the press too, right? You know, and the handheld computers we walk around with, right? It has democratized information, made it more transparent and open and better, right? And made everybody say, everyone's always been sensitive, at least in the States, to what you're saying. There's no easy remedy, right? We're all subject to original sin. Do the best you can. Best you can, I always think best you can is transparent and open markets, both in information and in product. Now, I'm an American, so we all think, and we've been right, that anytime you let us play competitively, we're going to win. It's when we don't get to play competitively that we're going to lose. So, yeah, it's a bread in the bone kind of thing. We okay?
Nasco.
Can I just ask? I'll hand it right over. But you said you believe in...
Did we not talk about no questions in 3 parts? Go ahead.
You said that you believe the free, like, open market of information is very important. But you also just said that, like, the first thing someone does when they become successful is buy a newspaper. How do those two ideas square?
Oh, that's easy. You know, you make some money. You want to say what you think about the world. And, you know, the great thing is that there's 50 other people who are also saying what they think about the world. In the United States, Jeff Bezos is a man of the left, right? He bought the Washington Post, and that's fine. There are folks on the right who have bought their own newspapers. I don't worry about any of that stuff. You know, the important thing is that everybody gets heard from. And I think there's enough mechanisms in place to make sure that happens.
Thank you.
Not that I'm wild about rich people buying newspapers, by the way. I don't think it's a great thing, but, you know.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hello, sir. Thomas Georgiev from Utilities Magazine. Talking about regulating lobbying, What's the significance of the level of rule of law? And could you elaborate a little bit on this?
Significance of the level of
Rule of law.
oh, rule of law.
Because we can have the perfect lobbying regulation, and if we don't have the prerequisites, you know.
Benjamin Franklin was one of the founders of the United States, right? And I went to the university he founded as well. And did somebody gas back there? One of Franklin's favorite sayings was that laws without morals are in vain, right? Okay, so lawyers love that phrase, rule of law. But the reality of it is that the rule of law is only as good as the people executing it. And it's only as good as the knowledge base of the people executing it. So, was there a lot of crime in Russia when the Soviets ran it? No, they had great rule of law. Was it a moral rule of law? Was it a just rule of law? Was it good for everybody? Was it fair? Was it equitable? Huh? A lot of people sit in camps in China right now who are exposed to the rule of law of the Chinese. So I was careful around rule of law, right?
Okay. What about judicial system and corruption from the judicial point of view?
Wow. We're really getting into it, aren't we? Sorry. Are you trying to ask me whether judges are corrupt? No?
Whether this matters when you introduce lobbying regulation.
Yes, of course. But I've yet to find a system that really polices judges well. For the most part, you're either blessed with an honest judge or you're not. Wow. It's a bunch of questions from the back. Anything else? You want me to do 10 seconds on the election? Can I do 10 seconds on the election? Oh, can I do 10 seconds on the election? Yeah. Trump's going to win. Economy's going to be good. Trump's going to win. Democrats are going to nominate somebody who's essentially unelectable. Yeah, unelectable. It's in the English-speaking world, there's a saying, it's better to be lucky than good. This is going to be one of those elections where it's a hell of a lot better to be lucky than good. And, you know, for our little ghetto that we talk about, the energy stuff, it almost doesn't matter. Because natural gas is now woven into the price of electricity in the United States. And oil, you know, the Americans aren't the swing producer, but we put a top-end constraint on the Saudis. Lou, don't just... We put a top-end constraint on the Saudis. So even if a communist were to be elected in the United States, they would have a lot of built-in incentives not to fidget with the production. They just would.
But it would certainly make a difference with the climate change stuff.
Can I just hit that for 10 seconds? Does the long rash of communist activities in the continent, has that worked to do anything about climate change? I mean, have emissions been reduced, is what I'm asking? Yes. Really? Across the EU, reductions down to what? 5%? 8%?
You're right. The relations between the reduction in emissions and the...
Has to do with natural gas backing out everything. Yeah, I'm tracking you 100%. My point is that climate change is a great conversation to have because everybody gets to raise money off it. But at the end of the day, you're never going to convince people to accept paying more for energy. No one's going to impoverish themselves for no reason. Who brought up the yellow vests?
Monsieur Macron.
Yeah, right? The yellow vest. No one on this planet is going to impoverish themselves, is going to pay any more for energy because of climate change. Maybe a little tiny small percentage. And that's why the risk of this is very high. The risk of something actually happening is very low, at least in the States.
The good news for you in California, they're starting charging bills. Carbon tax 2% or something like that. in restaurants?
I said the United States now.
Okay,
I regret
thank you,
that.
Mike.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. That was good. And next in line comes Martin Vladimirov. He comes from the Center for the Studies of Democracy. We're good friends. He used to work for a number of energy research sites and top. Oil price, was it?
The Oil and Gas Journal.
Oil and gas journal. Okay, so he has a pretty good experience. Usually when I located him, it was either in Saudi Arabia or in the Gulf states, always trying to make a story. Martin, floor is yours.
It's very difficult to go back to LNG after this blue sky thinking talk. But it's always nice to have this, because especially in times of Easter when we don't really work too much these days, so it's a perfect time for these kind of broad discussions. They're critical for the overall picture of where our economy is heading, where Europe is heading, where the world is heading, of course. I work for a think tank called Center for the Study of Democracy, and I've been explaining to all of the people that I meet here, this great conference, that it is a misleading name. It was founded, this think tank was founded in 1990 when it was very popular to be related to democracy and transition to democracy. So it's a brand, so to speak. But we have an economic department which deals heavily with energy for the past decade or so. And we look at a number of different things. So we don't look at just gas, but we look at energy security in general and energy transition, which is the key word for Europe, for everyone who lives in Europe. Energy transition should be on their lips at one point or the other. And I'll try to kind of come back to what Ilian mentioned yesterday, the window of opportunity. But I'll be a little bit more skeptical, because I like to be more skeptical, and you're always on the safe side if you're more skeptical. So I'll play the devil's advocate in a way about LNG. Not saying that it's not a great development, but we shouldn't, we have a saying in Bulgarian that the fisherman shouldn't fry the fish before he has actually caught it. And the same with LNG, I think, in our region. And I'll talk just briefly on the structural changes of the European gas market and by extension the European energy market, and what does this mean for the future of LNG. And I'll talk about the most recent development, I think, of price convergence in general, LNG contracts going below traditional oil indexation contracts. And then I'll talk about some of these potential effects on the market here in Southeast Europe. And I'll be very brief because you've seen a lot of these data, maybe in other form. By the way, when preparing a presentation and when you haven't done a specific report, except one graph here in my presentation, you're trying to look for the kind of the best data out there that is kind of closer to what you think the reality is. So it's always a subjective exercise, by the way. So I looked at this prognosis report, a consultancy report, with whom we have slightly worked, but not really, in this modeling exercise. And this shows the development, the expected development, scenario for the development of the gas consumption in the European Union and the structure of the gas consumption until 2050. It incorporates a lot of the scenarios that the European Commission uses. And in general, kind of the standard thinking about how the gas market will develop are used in this model. And the graph shows that primary consumption of gas, so meaning basically gas used for heating, for household use, for industry, as a share of the total use of gas falls down, while the gas used in electricity increases. Why is that important? Because it is very much related to an overall shift in energy markets, which points to a way to limit or reduce carbon emissions as a centralized goal. I know this goes against exactly what was said in the previous presentation, but it's what kind of central planners in Europe are aiming at. So they aim at more decarbonized forms of energy supply, but in order to achieve that, they'll need gas as a transition fuel. So this graph shows exactly this. The share of natural gas in electricity generation in Europe rising because it needs to compensate for the closing of coal-fired power plants. And why are they closing? Because the current carbon emission tax in Europe, the ETS allowances, are getting too expensive, so the coal-fired power plants are just not competitive enough. And gas might make them more competitive if they switch fuels. This is what the graph shows. How does this relate to the structure of European gas supply? It basically maintains the status quo and actually deepens the status quo. And the status quo is that Europe is getting more and more dependent on Russian gas as we speak. Why? Because as you see here, natural gas consumption falling actually, or stagnating at least, for the past decade or so. But Russia's share of natural gas supply increases. It increases because domestic production is falling. As you can see here from the domestic production profile of the European Union. And this graph actually is pretty optimistic. We expect the red line, so the next years, to have an even steeper decline in domestic production. Who will fill this gap? Logically, everyone. LNG producers, Norway, Algeria, Australia, you name it, Russia. But who is the best positioned to fill the gap? Well, it's Russia, because they offer the cheapest gas at the moment and the biggest hubs in the region. That's why I'm saying I'm playing the devil's advocate here. So if we assume the current position of the market and we extrapolate, we might see more Russian gas. But this comes to what Ilan said yesterday. There is a window of opportunity. This window of opportunity is related to the changing picture of LNG markets right now. And this window of opportunity is around 3 years. 3 years in which countries very dependent on Russian gas can try to diversify and actually push away the market share, so push down the market share of Gazprom. As you see from this graph here, although we have heard very optimistic thoughts here, and I'm sure that in the future some of these numbers will go up, US LNG is still a trickle. US LNG supply to Europe is still a trickle. It's just not competitive price-wise. Why? Because most of US LNG still goes to Asia. Because Asia, on overall terms, has higher prices. It's just, as Stelios was telling earlier, it's about simple choices, simple economics. When LNG suppliers have to choose markets, they choose Asia because Asia markets trades at premium to European spot markets. By the way, I asked Stelios where is the Greek LNG price here, and it's even lower than the TTF in Spain. So it's even more competitive seeming, but the gap with the US LNG is higher. So this might change with the extra 100 BCM that will come on the market in the next couple of years. But that's the window of opportunity I was talking about. And if we look much closer in the different contracts that are being traded, and this is a very small sample of the contract being traded in Europe over here, you see a very tremendous shift. My colleagues at Argus Media, who actually produced this data, they told me that they're calling it crazy. They don't know what's going on. So what they see is basically LNG contracts to Greece and to other places, basically going way, way below the oil indexation, which shows that there is growing convergence of prices. There is a growing appetite to deliver LNG to Europe. This could be the effect of Russia, as Vasco said, Russia delivering gas on the Turkish LNG terminals. But it's obviously a shift. It's a 6-month shift. So we don't know in 6 months, maybe the graph will be in the opposite direction because we've seen such swings before. But this seems to be more sustainable. There seems to be more meat behind this trend now. So what is going on? Is natural gas really delinking from oil? I think generally speaking, no. Natural gas still follows oil movements, more or less. because oil indexation is still the dominant form of contract making, for especially long-term contract making. But gas price movements correlate much more closely, especially when we're talking about hub prices. Gas-on-gas competition is rising, and it's rising everywhere in the world, even in places that it did not exist at all. The North American contract, or the US LNG contract, trades at a premium, still, as we saw from the previous graph here. Quite a significant premium. We're talking about the blue line. But it is growing closer and closer, which could be the result of growing supply, and maybe this trend will be more sustainable in the future as well. But most importantly, as I mentioned, Greek LNG for our region, with what we should care is that Greek LNG prices have collapsed. Whether they have collapsed enough to make Greek LNG competitive on the Bulgarian market, we're still to see, because as you know, transportation costs, et cetera, administration fees, et cetera, corruption, bad governance, all these things have to be put into the estimate. But there is hope. And what drives the delinking of the oil indexation with the hub-based contract making? Well, of course, higher gas production around the world. LNG production has doubled since 2008 to around 450 BCM per year. It is a buyer's market. And a buyer's market means more flexible contracts. And in times of oil price volatility, no one wants to have volatile revenues, or volatile costs for that matter. So there is, both on the demand side and on the supply side, an urge to change the status quo. And this has been reflected in certain contracts, long-term contracts having different oil price indexation formula. So the curve slides downwards, so from 15% to 11% oil indexation, or things like that. So these things have been seen already in the market, but they're not, this is not a trend that is already set fully, because still oil price indexation rules. But indexation to hubs becomes increasingly more predictable for estimating netback pricing. This is the most important thing. For LNG suppliers, if they choose, if they make this choice, and in a growing demand for LNG, which we are also seeing, in such a situation, there will be much more room to actually create a more predictable pricing formula that is disconnected with oil or is only partially connected to oil. So what are the alternative options? One is this cost plus, and cost plus already exists. This is the US LNG contract. It's basically the Henry Hub price plus transportation costs, liquefaction costs, et cetera, et cetera. Or you have the alternative pricing option of gas hub basis. But this is still far away. We've seen Asian gas markets trying to create such gas hubs. We are looking at Bulgarian gas hub. I'm a little bit smirking because I really don't believe Bulgaria will become a gas hub, but that's a different story. I'm not going to go into it. Maybe Turkey could become a gas hub. Probably Turkey has the biggest potential in the region in terms of diversity, liquidity, competitiveness. Well, both. Anyways, possible competitiveness on the market. Yes, but this is also far away still. So we still have this status quo. It's kind of in the middle ground. So maybe this future supply that you guys are referring from the States could upturn the things, but I still don't believe that fully. Who needs to step in the game, his game? Traders. There are not enough traders, and there are not enough financial guys who actually create complicated future contracts, hedging instruments that can actually sustain some of this activity. This is what we need in order to change the status quo. Because natural gas is a very conservative market, it seems. It's like a very 19th century sounding market when you think about how relationships are being carried out. And I think the most conservative of all relationships has been the Gazprom-Bulgargas relationship, but that's another topic again. And as you see, I just wanted to illustrate this idea of developing oil indexation markets. There is room, especially at higher oil prices, there is room for maneuver. When oil prices go down, you know, people go to the sensible thing of reverting to what they know best. When oil prices go up, they're ready for changes. So we should hope for the oil price to stay quite high, actually. So the fall in LNG prices in Europe below oil indexation could signal a market opening. And this is the time to act now because the market is tightening. And I wanted to show you this graph here. By 2025, the LNG supply glut would be over, according to most prognosis. I looked at several things. I found this most kind of appealing to me visually. So by 2025, the LNG supply excess will be out, and there will be again a market that would be most predictable with oil index prices. So this is the market opening right now in the next couple of years. And unfortunately, with China growing by leaps and bounds, by Southeast Asia growing by leaps and bounds, India, Malaysia, Indonesia, growing their gas consumption, this demand surge will basically kill much of the incentive for alternative suppliers to capture European gas market share, because there will be no need to compete in Europe when they have the open market in Asia. And traditional pipeline suppliers like Gazprom, like Algeria, like Norway, by the way, I don't know, Norway is kind of the good guy, so we don't mention them. Norway would preserve their market share as well. They will be locking in European suppliers in long-term contracts. As we speak, they're doing it. Maybe this won't be 15-year contracts, 10-year contract. This will be 2-year contract, 5-year contract. But they'll still be locking in suppliers so that they don't have much room to maneuver. So what we have to do in this closed window of opportunity, we need to do our homeworks. So CE buyers, Southeast European buyers, and governments at the same time need to act together to preemptively basically acquire enough LNG capacity and LNG room for suppliers so that they can be competitive and they can actually compete with Gazprom in the next 10 years. We're talking about 2025, not now. And to do that, we need to do things like the Lithuanians did. We need to build a very expensive terminal that we don't really need and that is not cost effective, but which brings our bargaining position at a much higher level vis-a-vis Russia than before. And Gazprom comes and gives us 22% reduction of prices. Alexandroupolis might not have the same effect, but it will definitely have an effect on Gazprom. Because Gazprom listens when there are some challenges, when there is some bargaining position on the other side. When there is no bargaining position, it's hard to change the relationship. It's an asymmetrical relationship. So we need to do our homework. This means also doing boring stuff that does not need infrastructure. You were talking about infrastructure. Who needs infrastructure? We want to just expand one storage facility to 1 BCM per year. We haven't done that 20 years now. I did my bachelor's degree in 2010, thesis talking about Nabucco and South Stream. And I was discussing Chiren expansion in 2010. The same things, the same figures. Nothing has moved. This is a simple project. This should be done in half a year. I'm sure in the US, a gas storage like Chiren is built every couple of months or something. I'm sorry, I might be exaggerating, of course. So we need to do our homework first. So interconnectors, gas storage facilities, flexible LNG terminals, cooperation between TSOs in the region so that the fees, the transmission fees are being brought down in a way. How can you transport LNG from Revitusa when your transmission fees equals the cost of gas or something like that? It's just impossible. So there needs to be more cooperation. We need to do our homework. And it doesn't cost money. These things don't cost money. Turkish Stream would cost money and it would not get us anywhere. But these things are cheap. These things is about administrative capacity, it's about professional management, it's about independence from political meddling, and it's about prioritizing security and competitiveness and liberalization rather than basically large-scale projects that remind us of the glorious communist past. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Question, Lou.
I have both a question and a comment. The first comment is EU emissions. Okay. Of course, EU emissions fell after 1990 only because of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the elimination of colossally wasteful, massive industrial plants. Actually, EU emissions have risen in 2016 and 2017. The next thing is sort of, what things cost is really important. It's really not that important whether US LNG gets from point A to B. It just needs to get on the water, right? Let the traders move it around to the most efficient place. But if the US is active in increasing the world supply of LNG, it will be a benefit to the Europeans. How people lock up those supplies just depends upon different conditions. The other interesting thing is, I know you don't really talk about this, but can you really say, for example, the German example of emissions control is a success? They now have some of the highest power prices they have power prices which are close to what they charge in the Hawaiian Islands. And
More than that.
Yes, and estimated cost from German officials that I spoke to in Houston a month ago was $500 billion. So my question is, what did the EU or the Germans buy for $500 billion? What environmental protection did they get for this amount of money? And I actually think that this is stuff that we need to sort of think about. And then finally, I don't know what the long-run price of LNG is, but I do know that if we have competitive markets, that we're going to be better off if the long-run price of LNG and oil is lower rather than higher.
No, I absolutely. I'm sorry. Are we collecting questions or just?
No. Go one by one.
Okay. I think you are right. The way Germany deals with its energy transition is quite controversial, especially because they're pushing everyone to do the same thing. But they have done quite a big change of their energy market. We cannot. I'm talking about facts currently. 25% of electricity in Germany is produced by renewable energy. This wasn't the case 20 years ago. Only less than 10% was produced by renewable energy. Why do you think that's a good thing? I actually would like to hear the answer. Why do you think that's a good thing? Because it reduces emissions, and by reducing emissions, it reduces global warming.
Germany will have no effect on, even using the IPCC model, the German experience will have no effect.
No, everyone has to do its bit. It's
not only that, but at what cost?
At what cost?
Germany is astronomical.
Look, taxpayers.
It is totally idiotic. What Germany is doing, the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal said, the stupidest energy policy in the world, and that's putting it mildly. Germany is currently paying 33 cents.
We are gradually moving into the next decarbon conference. We're gradually. That's Alex is just opening.
Granted, the decision to close down nuclear power when you're trying to decarbonize your system is a stupid move.
So make sure you get the right lessons from that.
But if nuclear power stays in Germany, if it had stayed and they're not closing off power plants, actually the German power would have been cheaper, much cheaper. It's the confluence of things. When you try to have all the best things from all the worlds, just cannot have that. This is the problem. But look, coal is not dead, of course. But coal, it would be very difficult to survive in Europe with the current administration of carbon taxes. And this is a chance of gas, actually. Actually, I didn't. Can you put on the presentation? I skipped the graph I just wanted to show, which is quite important. Actually, the only thing that probably you haven't seen before. It's about Southeast Europe. So basically, this is a projection that we did together with partners all around Europe about how gas consumption in the electricity system would develop in Southeast Europe over the next 3 decades based on 3 scenarios. No target, no cutting of emissions, no policy for cutting emissions, fully decarbonization, so basically 100% of electricity goes green by 2050, and delayed decarbonization. So we don't do anything until 2035, and then we start gradually doing something about it. So the no target scenario, even in the no target scenario, coal-fired power plants are done by 2035 because of how the European taxation system works. Because coal-fired power plants need to pay emissions allowances, they are going bankrupt all over Europe. And I'm not saying just subjective things, whether I'm green or not green. It's just the reality of what's going on. And this is a chance of gas. That's why I wanted to say I wanted to show this graph. This graph, for example, for Greece, shows a tripling of the amount of electricity generated by natural gas by 2040. It shows a 5 times rise in electricity generation in Bulgaria from natural gas until 2050, based on a no target scenario, so no decarbonization. So instead of saying, okay, climate change policy is just bullshit, we should stop it, it's better for gas to adapt itself to that. And I think, for example, gas associations all around Europe, they already have realized that, and they're actually pushing this image, more or less. The image of the natural gas is a transition fuel. And unfortunately, I'm trying to be realistic here, not about, this is what Europe wants, and this is what Europe is going to try to achieve, no matter whether gas, coal, or other industry wants it. And this might be a problem from an energy security point of view, from an energy affordability point of view, but this is reality. And natural gas plays a very important role in this reality, and this should be acknowledged. And for Southeast Europe, this is a chance, a unique chance to actually grow the gas market. If you actually jump on the bandwagon that gas is a clean fuel, because it is a clean fuel compared to all the rest, compared to firewood. Someone said today that electricity, I think Svetlana Ivanov said that electricity is the biggest source of heating in Bulgaria for the households. Well, it's not true. It's 54% of people use firewood. We're even less developed. Firewood. Yeah, they have electricity and firewood, true. But look, we're at the stage of firewood. It's much easier to win the debate from firewood to gas than from firewood to electricity if you liberalize the market and if you prove that natural gas is a transition fuel to this reality. And the modeling shows it, and this is without any policies. This is just what carbon emissions tells you. Thanks.
Next question. No questions?
I said I'll play the devil's advocate.
Nasko.
We already heard about the elections in the States, that nothing will change, but what about Europe? Do you think that energy policies, climate policies would change after the elections for new European Parliament, leading to a new European Commission, etc.?
I'll be surprised, honestly.
It's a question to the whole room, if someone wants to intervene, maybe.
I'll be surprised, to be honest, because, green parties and socialist parties are on the rise. Spain just elected for a second term as a socialist government. The Green Party is becoming the second biggest party in Germany, slowly, gradually, but surely. So I doubt it. I think that this kind of policy is here to stay. Maybe I cannot predict more than several years, but I think for the foreseeable future, for the next 5-10 years, this seems to be the dominant agenda, fortunately.
My question is very short. How long should be the transition period? 10 years, 100 years, or whatever?
These are deterministic scenarios. You know the difference between deterministic scenarios and stochastic scenarios. These scenarios have a goal. So basically, these scenarios show 3 pathways, and all 3 pathways go to the same objective, which is transition from high carbon to low carbon economy. If we do it stochastically, maybe there will be a different outcome of this. But if there is one policy, and if we assume that this policy is followed for the next 3 decades, this is what supposedly the math tells us it would happen. So I'm not saying this is the only reality, but this is a kind of a policy-driven reality in a way.
Okay, thank you, Martin. And now we come to the crème de la crème, as the French would say. This is the cherry on top. Alex would be doing the closing.
Such as they are.
Yes.
I'm going to talk about something that I know very little about, but as my kids and assorted former wives will say, this is nothing unusual for you. And mostly I do so because my boss here, Ilian, couldn't find anybody, any other fool to do that. So keep that in mind. The idea is that there is a transition in the LNG market from huge terminals. We're talking about terminals above 5 MTA, many of them, as you know, in Texas, in Louisiana, all over the place, to much smaller terminals. Do I need something to switch the...
It's probably there, yes.
Oh,
Not a surprise.
okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Where do I press?
Left, right, yes. The other left.
The other left, which means the right.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm going the wrong way.
Yes, this is the...
So what is causing that? There is a movement away from super large terminals to much smaller terminals. And what is the cause of that? Well, it's price, pollution, things that you know well, but also technology. As you may or may not know, Shell has come up with new modular technology that allows a place like Elba Island in Georgia to install much smaller terminals a hell of a lot cheaper than the large ones, which virtually all of them are custom built. Then there are places out of the way, islands and such, where having major deliveries are simply not feasible. What is called virtual pipelines, which is delivery by various means to one place time after time that is not doesn't have large enough consumption to warrant major deliveries. And of course, bunkering. Bunkering means, of course, fueling ships, which is potentially very, very big. I will talk about a little bit later about that. And the regulatory burden of smaller terminals is a hell of a lot less than larger ones, at least in the United States. And I assume that it must be the same in Europe as well. So if one could take the so-called SFRU as the first level of non-major terminals, they are well established by now. We have one in Klaipėda in Lithuania right now, and the one in Alexandropolis that everybody is talking about will also be a floating storage and regasification unit. They are, again, very, very cheap compared to fixed area terminals like the ones we have all over Texas, Louisiana, and places like that. They are, the FSRU have a maximum storage of 120,000 cubic meters, which is not little, but it's compared to the big terminals, it's very little. Again, as I said, we already have one in Klaipeda, and another very interesting development that I believe Ilian has talked about. We now have the Turks have opted out, in my view, have opted out towards LNG. And specifically, they now have the largest FSRU in the world called Challenger, and another one called Neptune, both in Turkey, and they are building 6 LNG terminals. That to me indicates that, and it is perhaps not a coincidence that the import of Russian gas has gone down by more than 50%. I believe it's, what is it, 62% last year?
No, it's just the Trans-Balkan, 62.
Yeah, something, the Trans-Balkan line is 62% down. That in itself is a very significant development, I believe, for the region here. Here, this is slightly out of date, but it's the best one I could find. There's no unit planned in Kavala, as somebody mentioned, but there is, of course, Alexandroupolis is supposedly coming online later this year, December or so. More importantly, you can see the 2 Turkish FSRUs, the Challenger and the Neptune. And there's another one coming up in Cyprus, which would be part of the whole, part of the Eastern Mediterranean. The Lebanese are planning another one, Egypt, etc. In other words, there is a lot of movement in the region. Small-scale terminals. This is the example of Elba Island, which is, for those of you that know the geography of Georgia, is right next to Savannah, which is my favorite city, but that's not why I agreed to do this for Ilian. This was originally, like most U.S. terminals, was built to receive gas from Algeria. As you probably know, most of the current terminals in Texas, in Louisiana, and the Gulf were designed to be receiving units. They were designed to receive gas because everybody believed that the U.S., of course, would need huge supplies of gas. Well, things turn around in less than 10 years, which is actually one of the most amazing technological developments in the world, at least from what I can tell. As I mentioned, the technology has made it possible for this terminal to have now several lines that are of 2.5 metric tons a year, very small compared to regular terminals. And that cost very little, comparatively speaking. I think it's the entire cost is about $2.5 billion for all this. I think there's six units there. It just shows you what kind of trend is visible. And I think something very similar is happening in Corpus Christi, where the originally planned two 2 trains of 4.5 metric tons a year are replaced by 7 smaller lines, and this is not a unusual thing. I think something what Tellurian is doing in Louisiana is very similar, and there are other examples of that too. So the small-scale terminals, again, I think part of our future, at least from what Ilian tells me, although he doesn't tell me very much these days.
Most of the time you're spending in Georgia.
Right. Bunkering. This is actually somebody, I think Sasha Donchev was talking about what's going to happen when all these huge fleets of ships, including tankers, container ships, Navy ships, need to go over to LNG, which I think is inevitable. Because if you look at the cost difference already between diesel and LNG, it makes all the sense in the world. There are, of course, a number of bunkering venues. One of them is ship to ship. You just bring 2 ships alongside, and one pumps LNG in the other. Terminal to ship, etc. The prediction that I have seen, and I'm not going to vouch for that, but that as of today, there are only less than 100 vessels of any size that are using LNG as a propellant. And this, supposedly, in just next year, it will turn into less than 1,000, more than 1,000, and then the sky is the limit, as they say. I think it's a technology that is going to without any doubt, to become the rule, because it's just so much cheaper, and because, as I think Lou said, LNG is only going to become cheaper in the future. Finally, ISO containers. This is something that, again, is very new, but it is significant. What does that mean? These are simply what you're seeing here, 40-foot containers, which basically have only the frame and the tanker inside, which is filled with LNG. Why is that significant? Because it is growing by leaps and bounds in the United States, and sooner or later it'll come to Europe, and it'll come also to a place like Bulgaria. You could imagine a hospital that right now is not gasified, that currently uses very expensive propane or things of that nature, and that all of a sudden somebody offers them to deliver them at half price, to deliver them LNG. I think it's going to happen. To give you one example, I don't know if I have it here. Yeah, I have a friend in Jacksonville, Florida, who is a businessman, and he tells me about a company that he knows. I don't remember the name of it, which started exporting LNG by ISO containers to Puerto Rico. And until now, until last year, it exported 7 million gallons, which I assume is a quantity, but not a very large quantity. This year alone, according to him, they have bought 40 more containers and ready to export 40 million gallons of gas. And says the business is unbelievable. And so he's getting into it. I'm not sure that this is the case everywhere, but I would not be surprised if this is also something that has a future. Give you one example, the Polish terminal, the only one in massive terminal in Eastern Europe at Świnoujście, according to the latest figures I've seen, are now in the business of filling trucks, i.e. ISO containers, 40-foot containers, and so far they have done 2,700 of them, which to me indicates that, again, this is a growing business. So this is just a short demonstration of my ignorance about the subject. And if you have some questions, I may try to answer them, but maybe better Vasiliev to answer them.
You are up. You would be facing the barrage of questions from the audience. Any questions with regard? Actually, the most interesting part that we didn't touch upon is the ISO containers. It's the first time he brought the subject. I don't recall, probably yesterday, but it's a very, very interesting development. And of course, you went a little bit strong on suggesting that you buy at a half a price, yes. Which is...
well, if you look at the cost of diesel today with what's happening, it's not that far. Okay, well, again, I'm not sure I can answer your questions, but you're free to ask them.
The slides that you didn't show yesterday, are you ready to show?
Yes, Martin.
No, it's up to you, because we can show them.
Sorry, Alex. Alex, where do you see potential for such small-scale terminals being built here in Southeast Europe, and how do you estimate the market for that?
Well,
we have an LNG terminal in Bulgaria.
I'm sorry?
We have one LNG terminal in Bulgaria already. In Ruse.
Yeah, I don't know how. I don't know where the. I know that. I mean, if you count the FSRUs as small terminals. Then I think most of what is coming in, both the one in Cyprus and in Alexandroupolis, will be that kind. I did not know that we have one in Russia. But the point is that if you look at the at Jacksonville, from what this friend of mine tells me, basically, you only need a very small scale loading facility to load from a larger tank, LNG tank, to load these ISO containers. And they're doing it. It says anybody can do it. It's not a problem at all. It's just the technology exists. If the technology exists, sooner or later, it'll come here too. That's my view. Maybe we can ask Sasha what he thinks about that. But next time. Okay.
Okay.
Sven. Yeah, Sven.
We're coming to the final round of questions before I give the floor to our honorary chairman, my boss, the super boss, the capo di tutti capi.
Especially the capo di tutti capi. Let's not forget that. Yeah.
Alex, having in mind all the existing options with these ICO containers and other small-scale LNG facilities, do you see the end of the pipe gas era?
For what? I'm sorry?
Do you see the end of the pipe gas era?
Frankly, I would like to be able to say that I do.
This is again a new transition period.
I'm not, but look, to me, and again, I'm not an expert like Господин Vasiliev here or some other folks, virtually everybody. But look, I mean, it's without a doubt Things are going to spot prices. They're going to short-term contracts. Anybody can tell you that, including people ignorant like me. And so the movement is going that way. Now, whether it'll ever come to the point to where, all the gas would move by ISO containers, I don't think that's likely to happen, because the fact is that, to supply a major distribution center with, it's not feasible to do it with ISO containers. You have to have, much more serious.
Yeah, but theoretically
supplies.
it's possible.
I'm sorry?
Theoretically, this is also possible.
Theoretically, it is possible. There's no doubt. I mean, especially these small-scale terminals. To tell you something about Elba Island, and mostly because Savannah is one of my favorite cities in the United States, and I like to go there now and again. What they have done is they have basically secured a bunch of clients in the Bahamas. And so they're shipping ISO containers to all kinds of hotels in the Bahamas. And everybody's very happy because supposedly it's like 30% cheaper. And what hotelier would not do that if he had the... So I don't have an answer to your question, but the logic of the situation seems to me is developing against pipeline gas, against long-term contracts, and that's a more competitive. I mean, as Tom was saying, what we need is level playing field, more competition. We need all the things that we understand as market, which we don't have in Bulgaria. Unfortunately, after 30 years, as your presentation so well documented, and it's high time that we have this ability to do that for the I think you said the king of the client, and maybe I shouldn't be so optimistic, but I think it's moving that way.
Super. Okay, I just want to acknowledge Alex's contribution. He would, and also Justin Friedman arrived. He's deputy chief of the mission at the U.S. Embassy. His previous posting was in Turkey, and he's very knowledgeable about energy. Luckily, because it's not often the case where you meet top diplomats with the intimate knowledge. He was there where the TANAP happened, all the important things and developments, and luckily we have him here to give the perspective of the U.S. Embassy. They're in a very tough environment in a country that is not particularly still 100% or almost 100% dependent. We're trying to open up the door to LNG, and actually it was a great conference. So, Justin, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. I think I'm going to stand up just because it's easier to talk and stand at the same time. Let me just get myself organized here. All righty. Well, Ilion, thank you very much for inviting me to be here today. Chairman, IER Chairman Tom Pyle, I see Teodora Georgieva. I just want to say thank you all for inviting me to be here today. Ilion mentioned that I was last in Turkey. That was my last assignment. But actually, 2 days ago, I was in the United States, and I just flew back 2 nights ago, and my throat is a little rough, so I apologize for how I sound. But I'm sort of an old energy hand at this point because, let's see, it's now 2019, so 18 years ago, I was working these issues out of Washington, D.C. on Caspian energy. So the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan oil pipeline and the first Shah Deniz gas pipeline were projects that I was working on when they were still, some people called them pipe dreams as opposed to actual pipelines. Both are now pipelines, and I'm pleased to have been part of that process. But it's just a pleasure to be here today. You've been talking and discussing the issues of LNG in some detail, so I'm not going to try and recap what you've talked about, but I would like to leave you with two thoughts, and I'll elaborate on them a little bit. But the first thought is a slight change to a theme we used to say back in my Caspian Energy days, which is the old phrase was, happiness is multiple pipelines. And as Alex was just saying, pipelines may not be the answer any longer because we're moving to spot markets. So let's rephrase that to happiness is multiple gas sources. So that's thought number one I want you to walk away with. And thought number two is something that we've been saying as a government for many years now. Most recently, Secretary Perry said it, and that is that energy security is national security. So those two themes are going to weave into my prepared remarks here. The first is energy security is national security. It's essential to national security. And this is something that we, the United States, and our European partners agree on. And in 2009, well before this current administration, going back to the last one, and remember, I was doing energy when it was the Bush II administration, which was copying the policy of the Clinton administration. So it's consistency over the years, regardless of which president or which party is in power in Washington. And that is, we established in 2009 this EU-US Energy Council. And one of the key goals of that body is to promote transparent, open, and secure energy markets. And this past July, the EU High Representative, Federica Mogherini, and my boss, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, co-chaired the Council's 8th meeting. And this was the first since the beginning of the Trump administration. And modernization and development of energy infrastructure, along with diversification of energy sources for enhancing energy security, were the top of the agenda of that conference. Now, speaking in Prague last year, Secretary of Energy Rick Perry called energy security a vital component of national security. And he said independence, he pointed out, can be threatened in other ways besides outright invasion. Energy security, as Secretary Perry explained, requires energy diversity, a diversity of supply, of countries providing that supply, and of routes to deliver that supply. Sounds like happiness is multiple pipelines, version 2.0 or 3.0, depending on how you count. So diversity of sources and delivery routes ensure that energy is available at the best prices to all, and that no supplier can use energy to economically or politically coerce consumers. Unfortunately, we're quite a ways off from achieving that goal, but as what I picked up from Alex's remarks there, we're getting a bit closer, and LNG seems to be the key to providing that diversity in the short run because the energy markets and gas in particular are moving to short-term contracts. So the last time we had good statistics, which was 2017, 38.5% of European gas imports came from one source, Russia. And today, 13 European nations continue to rely on Russian gas for 75% or more of their annual needs. And I think the number for Bulgaria is, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's 97%? Oh, there's a little bit. We can't discount the little bit that's coming from local or domestic production, offshore. It doesn't count. You're saying it doesn't count. Okay, all right, 100%. We'll use your number. So Nord Stream 2 and the second string of Turkish Stream will only make this overdependence on a single source of energy worse. As Secretary Perry said, these are not commercial projects as their proponents proclaim. They are naked political gambits. I'm sorry, I'm reading because I'm quoting and I want to get them right. They are naked political gambits aimed at driving a wedge between Europeans. They would increase Russia's leverage over Europe's foreign policy and increase Europe's vulnerability to supply disruption. And everybody here in this room who was living here in 2009 knows what supply disruption looks like. So we, the United States, do not oppose Russia supplying natural gas to Europe. And this is something that I said 18 years ago when I was working on Caspian Energy. We don't oppose that supply, but we believe Russian producers must abide by the same rules as other suppliers. So let's be clear. Our position is not about our commercial interests. As President Trump stated at the 3C summit in Warsaw last year, the United States will never use energy to coerce your nations, and we cannot allow others to do so. So last year, we saw U.S. natural gas establish a foothold in the European market, dominated by Russia. And the most relevant data show that Europe is now the top buyer of U.S. LNG after a near five-fold increase in sales to the continent this past winter. The U.S. is second only to Qatar as an LNG supplier to Europe. So in this framework, in the framework of the U.S.-EU Energy Council, we are organizing an LNG forum in Brussels. And my notes say next month, but I believe it's actually Thursday. And so this ministerial level event will bring together the U.S. and European decision makers, as well as companies in the LNG sector. A key objective is to encourage business contacts and promote further uptake of competitively priced, and I want to emphasize that, competitively priced U.S. LNG. It doesn't take government subsidies to make it competitive. It's market, the producers are making it competitive, and that's the way it should be. But to bring this competitively priced U.S. LNG into the EU. American and European businesses are poised to invest in significant transatlantic LNG opportunities spanning the entire supply chain, including new infrastructure for upstream development, liquefaction, regasification, and, at the end of the day, pipeline distribution, or this interesting prospect of containerized LNG, which I think is very interesting for the Bulgarian market right now. And the good news, as Secretary Perry pointed out, is that the choice you face is not Russian supply versus no supply. This point certainly applies to Bulgaria. And I'm glad to see among today's speakers, Teodora Georgieva, the head of the project, the IGB, the Interconnector Greece-Bulgaria. This is either jet lag or my throat getting in the way of me talking. So I apologize again for that. But the IGB would go a long way towards diversifying Bulgaria's sources of natural gas. And I was very pleased to see from the reporting in the papers today that the Prime Minister has announced that groundbreaking will be May 20th. And we'll keep our fingers crossed, but I would love to see that happen. So once again, energy security is national security. The United States supports Bulgaria on its path to an energy framework that is more modern, more secure, and more independent. And so breaking the monopoly on energy supplies is not just about good economics. It's key for security. And in conclusion, I'll just quote what Secretary Perry said in Prague, which is that as NATO allies, your national security is our national security. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Would you like to take some questions?
I would be delighted to.
Question again. It's not easy to be representing a country that is exporting LNG and other stuff, and also the pivot of NATO security, when we have consistently over time have remained with 100% dependency. And that's a tough issue. Luckily, if we recall, this is the year where the window of opportunity starts, and we have a 3-year window of opportunity that is probably has never happened before. Okay, questions? Okay, I'll ask one question. We had the privilege of having our Prime Minister here. He attended, well, he met Tom and other people, then he attended dinner, he made a presentation. This is a very important statement in order to make sure that the media correctly translates what has been said. You simply have to give them the press release, otherwise there are all sorts of interpretations. So just now I would simply give you my story of because in the media you would read that Prime Minister Borisov said that investment in infrastructure should account for the contribution that we have to NATO as part of the national security. What the media reflected was that our government, or Prime Minister Borisov, wants subsidies from the United States in order to buy LNG, which I don't know, but he has never said that because it doesn't make any sense. So here, and we in the final round of talk, we also discussed that this is an interesting proposition because let's assume we don't expect that the money they would be spending on the extension of Turk Stream would count for contribution to energy security, but that's just a thought. But it might be true if our effort in diversifying with IGB really contributes to national security, because it really contributes. So what do you think of this line of thought that NATO is part of the security, the top security mechanism, and because energy security is part of, how do you relate this NATO taking over these, not a coordination, but some sort of overview of the way in which we develop our energy security?
That's a really interesting question, and it's a subject of active discussion at NATO. NATO does not move very quickly, but it has been talked about to make energy security a strategic consideration for NATO as part of the alliance's objectives for a number of years now. And I note that also in NATO-EU relations and NATO-EU security discussions, energy security is actually on the agenda and has been on for some time. So I think philosophically it makes a lot of sense to think about energy security as an element of national security, and it should be discussed in security organizations like NATO or in the NATO-EU context. But if you want to talk about making a financial calculus about a contribution, that's a harder.
He had in mind the 2% contribution to the NATO budget. Well, I was not privy to when he sort of put forward this idea, but I'm giving you the overall concept.
Yeah. I think that's a kind of a calculation that is just so difficult to do fairly because, okay, if you account one pipeline or the investment in one pipeline as a contribution to national security, how do you count the LNG terminal that's being built, that's going to be built?
On what part? If it's shareholding,
the numbers get crazy.
Yeah,
so better to keep it simple and look at actual defense, direct defense expenditures.
Super. Okay, thank you, Justin. We have come to the final moment in this conference where I would not sum up what we've said, but I simply would like to thank each and every one of you because it was a great effort, and it was great to be here and share part of whatever we had to say. I would give, finally, before making some final comments, then Tom would, for his final comments as the co-organizer on behalf of the Institute for Energy Research.
I'm going to go up front because
he's the ultimate boss.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Justin, for being here. And I have to say, I've been in Washington for 25 years, and I have never seen the kind of progress that's being made in Washington with respect to energy and free markets and how the United States views energy as a force for good in the world, as your bosses have. So tell them thank you very much for all of that. Thank you, Alex, for letting me be here with you, for inviting me back. I'm bringing the family next time. I think you're starting to hook me. Thank you very much for all those who made this possible, for my friends who joined me from the States. During Alex's presentation, I was laughing a little because he was talking about how all these liquid natural gas terminals were built to import LNG. And then lo and behold, The switch. Well, we have a mutual friend who's actually in the administration now who ran what was called the Center for Liquefied Natural Gas, CNLG. And his mission was to promote the import of liquefied natural gas in the United States. He was lobbying. And during the revolution, the shale revolution taking place, he was kind of scratching his head, bing, bing, what do I do here? Same group, same name, new mission, to promote the export of liquefied natural gas. And I bring that up because as a Yankee fan, one of my favorites is Yogi Berra, who says it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. And I think that all the talk that we're doing here today and all the things that I've learned, and I am optimistic, but I also realize and recognize you have a long way to go, a very long way to go. And I encourage you to continue to these kinds of dialogues, bringing other groups from the United States in, continuing to have these conversations. It's not about U.S. LNG for me. That's not what this is about. I'm not for subsidies or any of that stuff. What I'm for is a system that allows you to prepare for the future. And that system is a system that brings in diversified sources of energy so that you can keep energy prices low. And so you're not subject to the whims of any one individual for whatever his or her motivations are. That's what this is about, and that's the importance of what's going on here to break that open. We don't know what the future holds. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what the next thing is. We don't know what the next policy is. But we do know this. The system that we have in place in the United States, as flawed as it is and as flawed as it can be, should be replicated in other places because it really does work. And we're all into charts and graphs and numbers, and I bring that up just to close with this. We have to remember that ultimately this is about us. It's about consumers. It's about families. It's about their futures. And if they're living in a situation where they have to pay more and more for their energy, guess what? They do without a whole lot of other things. And so that's always what motivates me and my organization is to think about that and what impact this has on our folks, Bulgarians, Americans, everywhere in the world. So thank you very much for the time. Very enjoyable, and let's get some drinks.
Thank you, Tom. At this moment, I want again to thank each and everyone who contributed to the people who helped this conference happen, because as you know, we're living in a material world, but also for all the support we had from the speakers, from everyone, and I would promise on behalf of His Superior Highness, the boss, that we will continue and persist with this effort of organizing, because we would come probably next year just to see how far have we progressed or whether we have regressed, depending. But there's, as Tom rightly said, there's a lot to be done, and we've just entered this road to the LNG, and not particularly LNG, it's to changing the whole environment, the whole setup. Thank you once again, and I really appreciate that you came that close to Easter and before Labor Day, both. Thank you very much.